Social Justice Goblin! Welcome to the Breakfast Nook! So, I have decided to make a goal of I'm going to collect 1,000 comic book items and I'm going to start featuring these items. So, I wanted to talk about my first item that I grabbed off the wall, which is my Jonah Hex number 39. I got it because I thought, it looked, Jonah Hex has a conscience, and honestly, it just looked cool. But then you look at it and you think about it, and I haven't read the comic book yet, actually. I haven't read that story yet. If I remember that story, if I remember reading it in the Jonah Hex collection, it was about honor and all this other stuff that samurai were given. And he was drawn and portrayed in a manly Asian manner. He was portrayed... So, there was a lot of positives to that. But that begs the question, then. And this is something we need to talk about. Because this could be construed for being racist. It's fetishizing Japanese culture. It's got a guy in a Confederate coat who's the anti-hero of the story, who can't kill, but is sworn to because it's an honor thing. A very tough story. But that begs the question. And we need to talk about it. There is a lot of racism in comic books. From Ebony and Will Eisner's work in The Spirit, which I love The Spirit, but anyone that has to talk about it has to talk about Ebony, and the fact that Ebony was flat out a racist caricature. And you can't whitewash that. But that got me talking about this comic book that I just bought with this amazing cover that I found out was done. This is the only cover this guy ever did. I forget what his name was. I'd have to look it up again. But he only did this. This was the only cover he ever did. And I posted to a Facebook group that I've subscribed to that about, looking at a lot of the Target covers, there were some seriously racist covers that they had, particularly towards Native American and Asian. So then I started reading the comic book. And the first one that really strikes out as very racist, and I'm surprised comic book readership is not high in Asian communities, and they read more what comes from Asia, because, look at how they portray a Japanese person. That's just horrible. And they portray, here's how they portray the people from Southeast Asia, from India. Stupid, superstitious, because they get fooled by the elephant, and then they have the big battle. This is straight up Asian, all over Asian racism towards people of Asian, and it's just, we need to talk about this. We need to have a long conversation and say, what should we do with these comic books? Should we preserve them, or should we forget them? Because that's an interesting question. Because here's the other thing about this cover. While the cover's not racist, even though he's getting tarred and feathered, and your first instinct, he's getting tarred and feathered, and that kind of sounds racist, but it was more of a classic quality. The more historical oriented argued that it was a class level thing. So, anyways, the story though that it's based on is all of a sudden all of a sudden, out comes the big black monster. Look at that big black monster. And look, there they go. And it looks like a big black monster, and they call it ain't that run that polecat run. Hands up, black monster. Dan, what up happened? And accident group, Uncle Puddin'. And so there they go, looking at that. Look at how he looks in that panel, and he's the big black monster. Is that not saying something? To mention also, it was making fun of white people, which I'm fine with. There was a very popular genre, hillbilly, and this story is a hillbilly story. This is a hillbilly, and it's kind of pulling off the little Abner works and making fun of Southern people, but it was popular in America, even though at the expense of Appalachia. But then you get other types of racism that really we need to talk about towards native populations. And we have done a really horrible job towards portraying natives in comic books. That is, the indigenous people of America, as close to indigenous as possible. I mean, it would be interesting to read, but, you know. So, this is Famous Funnies. Famous Funnies is a reprint of comic strips colored. So this has, you know, sexist type, you know, girls competing, romance stuff that hard to follow. You know, obvious Asian stereotypes because they're setting it in the Far East, and, you know, they have to portray them, you know, who knows what they're saying, and they portray them in an unrealistic fashion, and I mean, and this is not even the one that's the most. This is the one that really doesn't offend. As I flip through it and try to find it, it's the first story. The first story, Steve Roper with Chief Wahoo. And he is every bit of a stereotype of a native person that you could imagine. I mean, horrible. And it's like, you know, I feel like, you know, I want to preserve Golden Age, and I collect Golden Age to preserve the history of Golden Age as best as I can. You know, collect the weird offbeat stuff and the stuff that people don't collect, and just collect weird stuff. But it's horrible, this stuff. And it's just in a modern sensibility. And the question it begs is, do we keep wonderful covers like this? These are wonderful looking covers. I mean, this is this is his only cover he ever did. Washington, he was a famous artist, very famous artist. He was the art editor for Target Comics. Do we keep these and make them cherished items, even though they're racist? Do we preserve them? Do we expose them and say, this was wrong, and we owe an apology to the Asian community? And I think we're making those apologies with the MCU's efforts with Shang-Chi. So, I don't know. That's an interesting question. All right?